Where would you go on a solo trip if you had 1 week to plan it and zero experience as a solo traveler? For the first time in the history of the world, it seems like solo traveling is everywhere. It's in every TikTok or Instagram reel that I see, and every YouTube travel vlogger seems to be traveling solo. And I don't know about you, but as an amateur traveler who's not only never been on a solo trip, but who also would much rather prefer exploring with an adventure partner for the company, but also for the safety, solo traveling is way out of my comfort zone. And I have a theory, it's not as glamorous as everyone's painting it to be. So spontaneously, I decided to test this theory to the extreme. And with the help of my friend Kelsey, we came up with a plan.
So first things first, I think we need to come up with some ground rules for this trip. Just like keep you in line. And then number two, you need to do like a fun activity or something while you're out there.
Who says activity?
Nobody!
Ultimately, we decided this experiment should have 4 rules. Number 1, the destination had to be far enough away from Atlanta that I'd have to take an airplane to get there. Number 2, I had to completely deactivate my social media during my trip to make sure I was fully immersed in the experience and not focused on how I wanted others to perceive it. Number 3, I had to base my travel around an activity. And for this, I chose going to my favorite pop artist's last show of her tour, which happened to be in Portland, Oregon, where I would then drive up the coast and spend a few days hiking in Washington. And rule number 4, starting that day, I only had 1 week to plan the entire trip. And to make this journey as comical and educational as possible, I'll be keeping track of every beginner traveler mistake I make along the way. And trust me, it gets pretty bad. So with very little planned and no social media, I headed off to the other side of America to see for myself just how glamorous or unglamorous this type of travel actually was, and to push myself yet again outside of my comfort zone. So I just landed in Portland. My literal first thing that I noticed, even inside of the airport, the air feels fresh. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to take the train into the city, then find a coffee shop, and then ask a barista there what I should do for the first day because I have nothing planned. The coffee shop I ended up going to was a coffee shop I found on a website called Sprudge. And I decided to go to a coffee shop first, not just because of the much needed energy after a 5 a.m. flight, but because baristas have turned out to be some of the most trustworthy and adventurous group of people I've found when traveling to a new city. So from the staff at La Perlita, I got a list of 3 other coffee shops to try, a restaurant to try to book a reservation at, and a Japanese garden to explore the next day. And after getting some work done and feeling re-energized and a little bit more planned, I packed my bags and left to go find my hostel. But little did I know, I had just made my first big traveling mistake. So remember how I was wearing a backpack on my flight? I brought everything I needed for this trip in one backpack because I was trying to sneak past Spirit Airlines and not get charged a carry-on baggage fee. And somewhere between my 20-minute walk from La Perlita to my hostel, the worst case scenario happened. And because of the bend in my backpack frame, I arrived at my hostel, which by the way was my first time in a hostel ever, with a completely shattered laptop screen. I wish I could show you more footage from this moment because I literally was like, I just had no idea what this meant for the rest of my trip. So I escaped to the rooftop of my hostel to hopefully have some sort of mental reset. And after taking a few moments to myself and trying to recenter, I decided to spend the rest of the evening trying to enjoy being disconnected from the online world. I took videos of my hostel, I rode a bike, I danced in the largest independent bookstore in the world, I read some of the 7th Harry Potter book at the hostel bar, and I tried to get a reservation at that restaurant that the staff of La Perlita had recommended to me. Okay, so I ended up at this fancy restaurant. You normally have to reserve like a couple days in advance to eat at this restaurant. It's called Republica, and they said that there's a chance that I could get in. Republica, I later found out, was voted one of the top 10 new restaurants in America in 2022 and was easily the best decision I made all day. Though eating a 6-course meal by myself was intimidating and even felt embarrassing, I knew that this trip was going to stretch me into enjoying my own company, and this was the first of many truly uncomfortable solo moments that would push me and make me more confident on the other side. And though I wish I could say that having my laptop broken and going to a fancy dinner alone were the hardest parts of the trip, that's not the case. And nothing would prepare me for what would happen on day 2. The day started off amazing. I e-biked to this Vietnamese coffee shop called Cafe. It's a pun. And then I made my way over to the Japanese garden. The garden was beautiful and expansive and had amazing matcha green tea, but while I was there, I noticed that my vision started to become foggy. And after a few hours and even rinsing out my contacts, it didn't get better. So I left and went to go pick up my rental car that I would need to start my road trip up to Washington the next day. And unfortunately, my vision only got worse, which leads us to mistake number 2. I didn't bring my glasses or an extra pair of contacts, and after what happens next, I will never make that mistake again. Because tonight, I was headed to the Chelsea Cutler concert, the whole reason I chose this city. And right as the opener Rosie started performing, my eyes began to cause me severe pain. The lights from the stage were hurting my eyes so badly, I gave up my spot on the floor and escaped to the bathroom, where I realized my eyes had started to swell immensely. And this is when I started to get scared. I was in a city where I knew no one, I didn't have health insurance, and I had no idea what to do. Thankfully, someone gave me Tylenol, and the employees at the concert hall let me sit up in the mezzanine farther away from the lights, but during the concert, I kept thinking about if I should even still be there. It was such a polar opposite experience from every other concert that I had been to. But I'm actually really glad that I stayed and even snuck back onto the floor for the last few songs. Not because the pain went away miraculously, but because Chelsea Cutler really has been the soundtrack of my life for the past 4 years. And even through the tears, I had a lot of feelings I got to process while hearing that soundtrack live. I looked like Quasimodo walking back to my hostel, and while I wish I could say the pain was over, it wasn't. I had the worst night's sleep of my life, which led me to ask the question the following morning, is it still smart to go on the road trip up to Washington? I didn't know how to answer that question without talking to a doctor, so I headed back to Cafe and then grabbed my phone to reach out to the doctor that I knew, who just so happens to be my sister. And yes, traveling with her has been extra convenient recently. She helped me realize that the cause of this was either allergies or me not putting enough solution in my contacts case that first night of my trip, and that my eyes swelling up might actually be a sign of healing. But because there was no more pain or fogginess, she encouraged me to press on. So I left my hostel and headed up the coast with a broken laptop, incredibly swollen eyes, and the desperate hope that the next few days would convince me that solo traveling was, in fact, what everyone claimed it to be. I loosely planned to spend the next 3 days hiking in the Pacific Northwest and visiting, thanks to my middle school self, the town of Forks, Washington, which, after a pretty long drive up the coast, was where I was staying that night. And while I unknowingly still had a few more mistakes ahead of me, I got to take a much-needed breather this day when I decided to stop at Cannon Beach, known for being the beach where they filmed the famous La Push scene from the Twilight movie.
What did your friends mean about, the Cullens don't come here?
You caught that, huh?
I couldn't tell you how many hours I ended up walking that shoreline, but as a girl raised in Florida, I had never seen beaches like this. And it was here that I started to realize an aspect of solo trips that I actually really enjoyed. Everything was my decision. I could walk on this beach for however long I wanted to. I could stop in Forks, Washington without someone making fun of me. And after some reflection, I was even glad that no one was with me during my laptop breaking or my eye pain, because I was able to pivot into positivity and not have someone next to me who felt bad for me or who maybe wanted to leave the concert to protect me from the pain. And so after roaming around the beach until I was fully content, I headed back in my car to finish my drive to Forks and then collapse into one of the hotel beds that awaited. And while I wouldn't say that planning a full day in Forks was a mistake, I would say that what happened next was one of the most comical experiences of the trip. So I get into Forks, Washington last night, and I'm driving around this morning. And guys, I have a hot take for you. What I quickly realize is that Forks, Washington is one street. It's just one street. It takes about 2 minutes to get across the entire town. I went to go to a coffee shop to sit down and ponder life, and there's 3 coffee shops and all of them are the drive-through ones. You can't even go get a coffee and sit down and exist. And that's when it hit me. No wonder Bella Swan was so depressed and kind of insane. I'm Team Jacob, but I would date a vampire if I lived here because there's nothing else to do. Okay, but all jokes aside, everyone I met in Forks was incredibly genuine and helpful, and yes, I did end up trying a coffee at all 3 coffee shops, and I even stopped by the one main store in town to buy a map and laundry detergent. And around this time, I have to admit, I started thinking about how much more entertaining this day would have been if I had a travel partner with me. There were just infinite possibilities for humor and bits, and instead, I was alone. I did, however, find a really dope trail to hike, and I don't know why Stephanie Myers never mentioned that there was a rainforest 15 minutes away from Forks, Washington, but there is a rainforest 15 minutes away from Forks, Washington. It's called HOH or HO, and it's in the Olympic National Park, one of the most diverse national parks in America. I was really excited to take it all in and even planned a more difficult hike in the northern section of the park the next morning. But before I made that drive, I had plans to get a few more shots down by the actual La Push Beach. However, filming, I realized, was starting to weigh me down and actually causing me to be less present. So I promised myself I'd take one shot of the Quilly reservation sign and then drive north. I was so tired of filming, in fact, that though I couldn't see the ocean from the parking lot due to the mounds of driftwood, I almost didn't even try to see it. But something inside of me told me, instead of getting back in my car, to take a break from my camera and just go take a peek at the ocean. And it led to my favorite moment of the entire trip. Because on the other side of the mounds of driftwood was yet another shoreline like I had never seen. It's hard to capture those 3 hours in a short voiceover like this, but what I will say is that it was gloomy, I was rained on, and it felt like I was in an absolute movie. I almost didn't want to put this section in the video because I purposefully didn't bring my camera and wanted to keep this moment sacred to just me. But I think that's why I actually wanted to say something. Because while I wouldn't say that filming at any point of my trip was a mistake, I do want to give you a piece of advice if you end up doing the same challenge. You don't have to film everything. In fact, I challenge you not to. Though most of the beach was secluded due to the rain and gloom, I did end up meeting some friends who took my photo and even showed me where some starfish were. And so by the time I finally headed back up north to my Airbnb, I was completely drenched and unbelievably happy. But the next morning, nature wasn't as kind to me because for my last and final adventure before driving back to Portland, I expected my experience hiking Mount Storm King to look exactly like how all of the YouTube videos portrayed it. And instead, the view was covered by clouds on the entire way up. The hike was painfully steep with deadly drop-offs, and there were thin, slippery ropes at impossible-to-climb sections. Though I contemplated turning back a few times on this 2-mile hike that was straight uphill, I really wanted to accomplish this feat. And magically, right as I summited with a few extra friends I made along the way, the clouds began to part. One of the women I climbed up with was 60, and I was incredibly inspired by her story. She had just started a mountaineering course, and it reminded me of something Matt from Yes Theory wrote in an email one time, how life is long. and we have a whole lifetime to become and to experience new things and get new hobbies and challenge ourselves in new ways. Doing something physically demanding is going to be on my checklist for every solo trip from now on, because I started my drive back to Portland, Oregon feeling absolutely euphoric. And while I wish that high would have lasted forever, the tides quickly turned when I got to the airport, because pulling into the rental car area, I realized I made my third and final mistake. Never turn in your rental car late. Because even if the employee at the front desk when you first pick up the rental car tells you it'll just be a $16 late fee, it'll end up being closer to $60. And listen, I could have easily avoided all of these mistakes with just a little more research or caution, but I wouldn't change a thing. Because no, I wouldn't say that my trip was glamorous, not at my level of experience or finances, but this trip did shift something inside of me that, not to sound cheesy, but I think I'll keep with me forever. Because if I can still enjoy my own presence and still dance and smile and feel euphoric, even with all of the things around me falling apart, it can only get better from here. And though I'd still much rather go on adventures with other people, I really hope that if you're on the fence about taking your very first solo trip, you choose to try this out and discover your own opinion about it. And see for yourself just how much you can personally grow when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And no matter what, just promise me to bring your glasses.